Gentlemen, it's an age-old question if you've ever seen musket warfare. You may be thinking, hey, those muskets look slow, they're inaccurate. Why don't they just use a longbow? The English mastered the longbow and used it to great effect during medieval Europe, but it was eventually phased out in favor of black powder firearms. Today, administrative results, we're gonna do a little bit of experimenting. We're gonna do longbow versus musket. Hell, there may even be a crossbow if you're a crossbow type of person. So let's dive on in. Good God, man, there be rapscallions about! Just as the founding fathers intended. So right here I have a reproduction brown Bess from Veteran Arms. I don't have the funds to buy a real brown Bess. Well, I do. I'm just not a brown Bess guy. I spent all that money on a Baker rifle, which we plan to go over in a future video. So if you're not subscribed, missing out. So some quick history on the brown Bess. Came about in 1722, and I think it was phased out in the late 18-somethings, but then on Wikipedia, it was still showing a service life into like the 1860s and 70s, but to who knows what capacity, because I know rifles took over a lot by then. And if you do look at the Wikipedia pages for the conflicts, it's just a massive list going down of never-ending conflicts, like just never-ending YouTube content potentially if you're a historian. So big thank you to Brown Bess for paying the historian YouTube channel bills. The brown Bess itself is a smoothbore musket. Rifles did exist around this time frame, but rifles were at the time more expensive to produce, manufacture, and even slower to fire than, say, a traditional musket. That's why muskets were so widely used. Yeah, they're not as accurate in theory, out as far as a rifle would be, but I think the misconceptions about them being totally inaccurate may be a little bit false, because if you look at a lot of historical text, those skirmishes were taking place over 100 yards, easy. It's not like they were going at each other point blank in the Patriot, but who knows, it probably happened too. Warfare is messy. I like being comfy. I also like looking good. Barbell Apparel has you covered. Not only can you dress well, but maintain a level of comfy athleticism while doing so. Right now, Barbell Apparel is running the largest sale of the year. It ends December 8th. Get any pants, jeans, chinos, the anything pants, and the previously sold out covert pants for just $99. Plus 20% off site-wide on anything else. The outfit you see me wearing is one they sent over. The long sleeve shirt, my wife loves it. She can't keep her hands off of me. Barbell Apparel can do the same for you. Maybe, I don't know. So a big thank you to Barbell Apparel. Take your athletic wear to the next level. Look stylish, be comfortable, and above all, be athletic. Don't mind me. Just training to take over Nakatomi Plaza. Gentlemen, this video is sponsored by Americana Pipe Dream Apparel. Fantastic young Zoomers getting after the milsurp space and arena. Night vision, knives, manual, sick milsurp clothings, and now e-bikes. They distribute the E-Ride Pro, and they are pretty sick. If you have the coin, they are very fun. If you don't have the coin, they have plenty of other items that will take your drip to the next level. I appreciate those guys very much. Optics Planet. Of course I don't have a sick optic on my musket. I should have reached out to Optics Planet, the optic sponsor of the channel. Big thank you to those guys. Oh, you see that flinch? Ha ha! We're in business, boys. Okay, so we had a massive technical difficulty. The flint that was on this was not striking good enough. Maybe I'm just undercharging the pan for the brown Bess because I'm used to shooting rifles, and that it was a whole thing. And I know my gear may not be period correct. Cartridge we're using is just a paper cartridge, very easy to make compared to an arrow. There is a 75 caliber ball in there, and on top of that should be 110 grains of powder, 10 grains for the pan, and then 100 grains for the charge inside of the musket itself. All right, now we're gonna go for the paper target. Any hits?
No hits.
Ah! All right, I think we're about 40 yards. We're gonna do one more shot before I do a Mad Minute, because I'm running low on cartridges.
Ready, my lord.
We'll go just the ball this time. Did I hit it?
You missed it, my lord.
Bugger! Let me see that. Oh no, I hit it.
You did? Where?
Bottom of the target, right in the groin.
Righto.
Smashing. Do you have your phone on you? Good God, man, what sort of technological device is that? All right, so we're gonna try this. We're gonna do a Mad Minute, see how many rounds I can get. This may be painful for you if you are a skilled man of the sword. All right, we'll start loaded.
Go.
We are so back. What's my time?
56 seconds.
Damn. All right, we'll call it there. The fun factor is pretty high trying to go through all this. It's frustrating. I could have swore I had more spare flint, but it seems like the flint is really giving me a run for my money today. Look at the size of those holes. I fired what, 2 rounds in that last volley? One's unaccounted for.
Is the British regular ready?
Definitely a militiaman. No British regular here. Ready, stop. That's unfortunate.
35 seconds.
We'll finish out strong. Look at this, dude. Absolute, like the size of your index finger for a hole. That is gnarly. I am having troubles with this musket. I am not doing as good as I wanted to. This is really my first day out with it, if I'm being honest. I will say, it hurts. Last brown Bess cartridge. I think I hit your camera. Let's go check out the results. The administrative results. Yar. This looks new. Boys, I gobsmacked him from about 100 yards away with the musket. Now here's something to think about is I am still very new to the whole musketry, the practice, all of that, but I was still able to, as a recruit, a very green recruit, manage to hit him right in the groin area, which is impressive. For how much practice I haven't done with the musket, I was able to pull off something like this, standing at 100 yards. That's kind of hard to deny. Now I want to try out some Warbow stuff. The English Longbow. Many give credit to the Welsh, and the English stole the idea from the Welsh, but archery has been around much longer than firearms has. Archery and humanity go hand in hand, and the English made popular use of the war U-bow. The war U-bow had its probably pinnacle of popularity during the 100 Years' Wars. Battles like Crécy, Poitiers, Agincourt, the English longbowman was credited for victories against a numerically superior French army. People will see the English Warbow and its fast rate of fire and think, well, in a time where these soldiers are all fighting in a massive formation, looking like easy targets, wearing a bright red coat or a bright blue coat, having no armor whatsoever, unlike the days of old, why wouldn't they bring back a longbow? But before we get to all that, let's put a timer on the clock and see how many arrows I can get on target as accurately as I can from about 40 yards away. Beep. Ooh, center punched him. That felt good. Ooh, yeah, baby. Those Frenchmen don't stand a chance.
Right, kid, don't get penisy.
One minute.
Bugger all. So that was my second speed test. We're probably gonna use that one because it looks a lot better. But 1, 2, 3 on the first round, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 impacts on the second round. No one felt a lot better. I will say there is that muscle fatiguing that happens though.
You know, all these problems with the longbow and the musket, I think I've got better luck just throwing a tomahawk.
We talked about this. Now this particular Warbow that I'm using is 106 pounds at a 30-inch draw. You can see it right there. I'm probably doing just under a 30-inch draw on some of these arrows, probably closer to 28 inches, probably around maybe 90 pounds, I don't know. I haven't measured it yet, but it still takes a fatiguing toll and I had to practice a lot even to get up to this poundage. And I wanna go even further beyond. I have a 120-pound bow on the way, which I wanna train up to and be proficient with. I'm just getting to a point where I'm like barely passable. Like how I kept all the targets within the square at 40 yards to me felt good given the poundage that I'm using. Now I just gotta try and tighten that group down and be more accurate with it. Now final test with the longbow, let's go down to where I shot the musket ball from about 100 yards. From here, I'm just praying that God wills my arrow close to the target so I can find it. A little low, probably gotta get her higher. So in the favor of not blowing through all my handmade arrows, we're gonna call this one defeat because it hurts. This is the closest I got to the target. Which isn't great. All right, so I've given Jordan minimal instruction on how to use a 106-pound, damn it.
I already failed.
All right, Jordan, go ahead and give it a shot. Other side.
I knew that.
Get the bow of in front of your body. There you go. That was painful to watch.
You lost another.
You're gonna fuck your whole shit up if you're trying to come across it. Like how you tilted the bow back. Okay. All right, you can see that it is not easy to just pick up a warbow and go into it. How did that feel to try and get back?
Harder than I thought.
Yeah. Well, do you know what makes a good soldier?
What?
The ability to fire 3 rounds a minute in any weather.
Easy.
Here be your brown best boy. Your best lass in the whole world. I think it works for Jordan.
That's a sign. It's the hat.
No hit.
Yeah.
Definitely hit it that time. So you can see that Jordan, who could not use the warbow whatsoever, was now able, with 0 experience, to hit a target with a musket. Clearly, Jordan, like me, he is new to muzzle loading. He would have to go some drilling to be proficient with it, but the analog example still stands that it is much easier for someone to be violent with a musket as opposed to a bow in this instance. All right, so I feel like I'd be doing you guys a disservice if I don't bring out the crossbow. Now, this one I was told from Todd of Todd's Workshop that is a 600-pound crossbow, and we use a goat's foot lever to draw it. Historically speaking, guns, when they came about, were still very new, and there was a lot of overlap with these different missile projectiles. You still had these early hand cannons or arquebuses being used alongside of crossbows and longbows, and there wasn't a clean phase out like one might think. Eventually, the gun did eclipse the bow, but it would take a little bit to get there. So what we're gonna do, we'll do a speed test for accuracy, same distance that we've been doing, 40 yards, and we're gonna go as fast as I can with a loaded crossbow, see how many rounds we can get off as accurate as possible. I'm using Jordan as my lever holder. We're working like we're in a pair of teams. So loosed 4 bolts. I think 1 definitely missed for sure. The other 3, I saw them impact. A fun little analog example. You are welcome. Crossbow did its job today. So we did some practical examples. You saw where the musket shined, where the musket did not shine, and where the bow shined. Now we have to do some yapping. And I will give you a lot of what I've learned, and I will talk about what I've learned from other historically minded individuals. So like I said earlier, if the warbow was so good, they would have continued to use it on well into the musket era, especially as troops were wearing less and less armor as guns became more and more popular. Now there was still, of course, armor being used. One of the easiest examples that comes to mind would be like the French cuirassiers, and they had armor that was shown that it could stop musket balls. Why didn't more troops have that? Well, that armor would be heavy, expensive to wear it on campaign, yada yada yada. Logistics probably didn't make sense for that time period where you wanted your troops to be light on the foot for a very long marches and carry everything that they needed on their backs. It's obvious that the longbow has a greater rate of fire. The problem is the longbow is not as good of a weapon in the overall grand scheme of things. It really lacks a lot because warfare developed a certain way. Where we had the armies of medieval Europe, we had a combined arms of cavalry, archers, men-at-arms. That army would start to be mashed together a little bit more once you start getting into the pike and shot era. Now the tertio is what comes to mind, where you start to see the rise of pikemen. People started to realize that, hey, this phalanx thing is pretty sick when you add guns and or other missile troops into the formation. And you can make a large army a lot cheaper. Now, the pike and shot would eventually develop into this little era, the musket, where you have a melee weapon on there and you have a ranged weapon attached. Very efficient. Every man can now come together, make a formation, and have a better chance at fending off, say, charging cavalry. Or they could all zerg rush and do a bayonet charge together. Or if they're skirmishing and taking pot shots at each other or firing in mass formation volleys, they can do a lot more stuff as opposed to, say, all you have is a pike, or all you have is a musket, or all you have is a crossbow or a longbow, whatever it may be, right? Now, the drawbacks, pun intended, on the warbow are many. A chief complaint is how long it takes to train someone to become very apt with the warbow. Now, I truly believe that those guys back in the day probably got extremely efficient and very good with their warbows. You got to think it was mandated by English law that you had to train with your bow. And there was all these accommodations made to make sure that the English people had access to archery equipment. It's safe to say that if you don't have all these other distractions that, say, modern people have, you would probably get pretty dang good with your bow and become very skilled with it. But it took years and years of training and mandates by law. Now, with the advent of the firearm and getting to say something like the brown Bess, I think there's a misconception that people think it was super easy to learn and pick up. And I think to some degrees, yes. I think the easy part was the time investment. I don't think it was a weapon for simpletons. Soldiering often, to some people, may get discredit thinking that soldiers may be just dumb, but soldiers are pretty skilled at their craft. Now, I know soldiers are probably dumb too, but what they're good at is learning how to fight, is what I'm trying to say. Where I think the trade-off is with the musket, I don't think it's a simple weapon to learn. I think it's a very efficient on time weapon to learn. If we drilled with this thing nonstop in a training setting for weeks on end and that's it, we would probably get pretty damn good with a musket, as opposed to years and years of practice with the warbow. The warbow takes intuitive shooting. You have to have a feel for what your arrows are gonna do, and they're pretty much like your arrows. Even some of my arrows that I make, they're not perfectly one-to-one projectiles to the next, or maybe variations in some that it's just kind of like, you know, God's gonna guide it there if he wills it. With a musket, there's a lot more controls with the variables. Yeah, it's not as accurate as a rifle, and people will often ask, well, if rifling existed at that time period, how come they didn't use more of them? Well, it was more expensive and it took more time to load until rifling and infrastructure got to the point where it just made sense to have rifles. Now, another thing too is a longbowman is pretty vulnerable when it comes to melee combat. They're not like lambs to the slaughter, but if you stack them against someone that is orientated towards hand-to-hand combat, where they're head-to-toe in plate or head-to-toe in some kind of armor and already have weapons that give them more range in the melee setting, they may be on the back foot. If someone, say, has a gun and a bayonet like this and it's appropriate for their era, then I think they're gonna fare a lot better. Now, funny enough, I think if you have a knight trying to fight a dude with a musket that has no ammo, I think the knight's gonna win, because what am I gonna do with this? Like, where am I gonna poke him to death with? But it's a product of its time, because that knight would probably end up getting smoked by me and my buddies with muskets, right? Now, a big part about warfare is logistics. When it comes to logistics of making arrows versus just a lead ball, well, things become far more complicated with the arrow. I'm a big fan of the Tudor era Mary Rose arrows. I got this from Todd's workshop, and it is a beautiful example of this period. Probably a little bit too heavy for the bow that I fire, so I'm hoping to work up to it. We got a needlepoint bodkin head up front along this shaft that tapers down towards the rear, and you can see there is a horn little inlet in there that helps with bracing against the higher poundage bows. I believe they used to use goose fletching, then they would use like a verdigris on there to help keep insects off of the fat style glue they would use on the arrow. A really beautiful handcrafted projectile. These things are very time consuming to make though. As someone that's made quite a few arrows now for my warbow, I will say getting to the fletching part is very annoying. If you had to do all this from scratch, it would be a big pain in the butt. Thankfully, I usually just buy my heads, get the shaft, get the fletching, and assemble. I don't really mess with the horn inlet. I just use a modern knock to speed up the process. Here we have lead ball. That's it. All you need is some gunpowder and you're pretty much set. And of course, if you want to be really creative, just roll it up into the paper cartridges and you have a fast deployment and use. You don't have to spend all this time trying to make an arrow. And this is a very small fraction of the overall size of a massive arrow. So carrying a bunch of ammo on you is a lot more convenient. Pretty dense, so if you start stacking them all up, they will weigh a good chunk, but when you have to start shooting, they're gonna feel really good to have. Logistics. Now, there were efforts to keep the warbow alive even after its heyday, and like I said earlier, there was crossover between gunpowder weapons, bows, and crossbows. Guys like William Neen came up with the idea of the double-armed man, where they would attach some sort of device that would keep a bow connected to a pike, and a gentleman could use his bow in conjunction with the pike. But to that, I think that idea is ridiculous, and obviously it wasn't used. I think some people at the English court at the time thought it was a good idea, but of course we never saw it used on a wide scale for obvious reasons. reasons. As someone that's tried to use a warbow, attaching it to a pike seems like a really bad idea, because now I have to carry on 2 giant sticks trying to shoot smaller sticks. Warfare is weird like that. Now, if we get to guys like Benjamin Franklin, he was talking about that longbows shouldn't be so easily cast aside, and I would assume maybe in the earlier days of the Revolution, where they were trying to conserve on ammo and powder, that maybe a longbow would have looked more appealing. I could see maybe during the earlier days of the Revolution, with the limited supplies that, say, the Continental Army may have had access to, a longbow is probably better than nothing. But yet again, you didn't see regiments of longbows being used against the British, right? I think a bow still could be used in that era. I just don't think I would want to use a warbow. I'd probably want to use something in the 50 to 70 pound range that's a lot easier to pull back. I was getting kind of proficient at 40 yards with that bow, but I'd rather have a more compact, efficient bow with a much less draw weight, especially if I'm fighting guys that don't have armor. Like, what's the point of having such a heavy warbow if you're not trying to gain as much of an advantage against someone that's, saying, wearing any sort of armor? Now, there was this thought process, and you see it in like pop culture, where arrows just go right through armor. And if that was the case, then why would they even wear armor? Because armor probably isn't as comfortable as what I'm wearing right now. Armor absolutely stopped super heavy warbows. Todd and Joe Gibbs have an excellent example of this. Joe being a master archer, shooting a 160-pound warbow at legit armor. I know we tested it on my channel, but that was like cheap costume armor for the lulz, so I apologize. But I mentioned it, I told you guys. Another thing I think of is with a warbow, you can't walk around with that thing primed and ready to go like you can with a musket. Once I load this thing up, I can walk around with it ready to shoot. The warbow, I can't be running around at full tilt with that thing. And of course, a big thing is that during battle, you're gonna get fatigued using a warbow extremely fast. Even if you're pulling a heavier draw weight that you can, like guys I know like Dash, watching him shoot the 160-pound bow, he can do it, but how long can he do it for? You know, I can shoot that 106-pound for, you know, a minute easy, but after a bit, it's gonna start to take a toll on me, especially if you're wearing all this armor. Maybe you're fatigued from the marching and the fighting. Maybe you even have some sort of sickness like dysentery and you've been crapping your brains out all over the place, and now you're expected to perform at a high physical level. That stuff all has to be taken into account. We're dealing with the human element here. With the musket, a lot of that can kind of get negated. You're not going to get as fatigued from firing this quickly at all. I still think you'll get shooter's fatigue, and I still think you'll get fatigued from all of the other things of battle, the stress of marching, the adrenaline of combat. You may also have dysentery, sucks to suck, I guess. But you're not going to be getting smoked by trying to do a back workout on the fly. And another thing is you could probably bring a bow into that era, right? I'm sure there was a one-off where it happened, I don't doubt it. I mean, I think of, say, the conflicts in North America when they're dealing with Indians. The Indians had access to bows and arrows, but oftentimes they would prefer to use a musket when they had the chance to. Now, of course, the crossover of archery and firearms would still continue on, but there's also certain settings where the bow may not be advantageous, right? If you have all these little minutia of settings where the bow works really well, but then you have all these settings where, say, a firearm works way better, I would rather have the firearm. For instance, if you're in the woods, you're in thick brush, trying to shoot a bow, especially a longbow in thick brush, becomes very hard, whereas a rifle, you're gonna be okay. Or I should say a musket, you're gonna be okay. Now, a big thing is velocity kills. There is a reason that we as modern Americans or modern war fighters use 5.56 projectiles. I got this one from Badlands Ammo, the ammo sponsor of the channel. They don't make musket balls, but they make some fantastic 70 grain ammo optimized for SBRs. This stuff is pretty nasty. You can carry a bunch of it inside of a magazine, and it's cooking at very high velocity, which is what is very lethal. If you took an arrow to a not vital organ or a heart or the head,
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
Chances are you're gonna keep on living for quite a while, which is gonna suck and probably gonna get infected and die a gruesome death, but you're probably gonna be okay for a bit. With these type of rounds, with these big old musket balls, yeah, you may also kind of have the same thing in the extremities. The damage is gonna be much more noticeable as a giant 69 to 75 caliber ball absolutely blows your bones and obliterates your arm, or just outright kills you if it hits a vital organ. Like, these things are pretty violent. Velocity does matter. And of course, logistics wins wars. If I was a ruler of a nation, I could create way more musketmen with a weapon like this than I could with proficient warbowmen. probably could make a lot of efficient archers, but they're all gonna be outclassed in the field of battle by musketmen. Yeah, they can have a higher rate of fire, but Hollywood doesn't let on to the greater engagement distances that took place in this warfare of this period. You have skirmishers, you have guys specifically designed with rifles, you have guys, you know, that are pretty good with their musket because that's all they've ever known. If you are trying to do this and you're encountering a mass volley of musket fire and you're an archer trying to stay out of their range, your efficiency of shot placement versus their efficiency of shot placement gonna be way worse probably. You clearly saw me at 100 yards standing with a musket, a very novice shooter with a musket at that, hit the target. Hit it in a place that would absolutely take the guy out of the fight. With the Warbow, unable to do that. And even if it did hit them, is it gonna be a lethal hit? Now, I'm just one man, and of course volley fire does kind of come into this, but volley fire with high velocity musket rounds versus slower velocity arrows, I would rather have the muskets. Now, I know a lot of this may seem obvious to you guys, but this is part of history. This is part of what built the worlds that we live in today. That's why history is so important, and it's a fun way for us to come out and experience history firsthand, as opposed to pontificating about it and arguing about it on the interwebs. A lot more fun to do it this way. I hope you guys had a good time. I absolutely had a blast. Got nothing else for you. Catch you guys on the flip. O'er the hills and o'er the main, through Flanders, Portugal and Spain, King George commands and we obey, over the hills and far away. Right, and